so this is Lizzie from Love From Lizi, and today I'm bringing you the Love From Lizi October 2017 card kit, 10 cards, 1 kit video. So as ever, I'm going to try and make this video as quick as possible, so I'm jumping straight in. I will give you various updates as we go when there's the time, essentially. So to start off with, I just split the cardstock down the middle. It is A4, so it's slightly different size to US and Canadian. And then I've used some of the cut-up sheets that are in the A4 pack. And I've cut out one of the back tiles, and then I've cut out the owl cover as well. And I'm covering over the mosquito one to make the owl one look like it has a little bit more dimension to it. I've just run the edge of the top part, if you like, with the owl in an oxide. Oh, and here I am having to do drink duties. So anyway, I'm back, and I've stuck a couple of the orange sequins from the sequin mix over the eyes of the owls, because this particular potion, if you like, is the owl's eyeballs. And then I've dropped a little spot of the Glitter Nouveau drops that came in the kit into the centre of the sequins. And now I'm just working on my card base. Now, the orange is great, but for this particular card I wanted it to be muted down a little bit, so I used that same walnut stain Distress Oxide, and I'm just sort of smudging it on, and I'm trying quite hard actually to not be exact about it, so that it is a bit darker in places than others. And I just showed you there how I store my blending sponges on the back of my big ink pads. I just sort of use a bit of washi tape to hold them down. Here I've picked a piece of patterned paper, and I've cut a panel to sort of sit along the centre of the card, so it will cover up all of that unsightly ink blending. I just trimmed the top and bottom of that off, and here, this is like a cheat version of peel-offs, if you like, so I just used my trimmer to cut some really fine strips of cardstock. Now you could do this by mounting the patterned paper up onto the specialty cardstock, but in my estimation that's a waste, because it all sits behind the pattern paper and there's less of it to use going forward. So these tiny little strips work just as well. I've put some double-sided sellotape onto the back of my potion, and I'm afraid my head makes awful lot of appearances in this video. I must have changed my seat before I started filming, so I do apologise. And then having stuck it onto that same green pearlescent specialty cardstock, I trim it out and then use some foam squares on the back. Now with hindsight, I would have done the glossy accents and the sequins and everything else all at the end, because I did smudge it a little bit, but that's card number 1 done. So here's card number 2, and I wanted to use one of the pieces of vellum. Now UK card sizes are slightly different to US, so I had to trim the vellum down a little bit to make it fit onto the card fronts that I had picked, but only marginally. It wasn't, we haven't lost anything through doing this. And then I've used a pencil just to very faintly draw sort of like a border. Now you could just freehand this if you wanted to, but it's when I try to be clever and freehand things that it goes wrong. So I just used a pencil, and then I cut a snip into the middle and cut that centerpiece out. And then here I'm using my big old Xyron machine, and gave it a good burnish to make sure that all the stick was on the vellum and not going to be sitting off the sides, because that does sometimes happen. And I've just got a sheet of acetate here, and I just lay that down on top, give it a nice firm rub to make sure that there isn't any bits sticking up. And here I'm just using a rubber to take off any of those pencil marks that I left behind. Now this is going to be a shaker card, so I've got some foam tape which I'm just folding in half here, and then I actually cut it into quarters strip wise, because I actually want to be able to hide the foam behind the green border that sits around the edge, so they do actually need to be quite narrow indeed. So I'm just using some non-stick scissors as well. I mean, they say non-stick, and they are non-stick, but sometimes it does still stick, which is a bit annoying. But okay, so I've gone around the edges, making sure there is no gaps at all, and here I'm just using my finger to push the foam away from where you can see it, where it's gone beyond that green. And on my card base I've put some double-sided sellotape, and I've picked one of the pattern papers that coordinates well with the vellum colours, and then I'm just using scissors from the back to trim the edge away. Here I've dumped a load of the sequins into the centre of the card front, and I've picked out all of the orange ones because orange doesn't quite go with the colour scheme of this card, and I'm having a look just to make sure it looks like the right amount of mix. And I've got multi-medium in the matte finish here, and I'm just sort of spotting little bits and pieces around the back. Because this is quite a large shaker, I wanted to stick some of the sequin elements in place so that they didn't all fall to the bottom when the card was stood up on a mantelpiece, for example. So then I've removed all the backing from the foam, and now I've laid it down, and I am just cutting along and trimming off any of that extra. Now here I've got my black Copic marker, and I'm merely colouring in the foam. Now this isn't a necessity, it's just I think it looks a bit tidier because the card is all black and green and Halloween-like, and it just means that now from the sides it's a little bit more finished. So here's card 3. Now this isn't in with the Halloween line so much. The stamp set, whilst obviously skeletal, is actually like an all year round sentiment sort of stamp set, if you like. So this is just an example, and to be perfectly honest, this is exactly the sort of card that I would give like my dad or something. My dad loves a simple card, nice and straightforward, and this stamp set particularly will be lend itself just very well for masculine cards, I think. Feminine as well, don't get me wrong, but it will be good for that. And here I'm using that same Distress Oxide that I did before, and I've actually, this is only a little scrap of, it's just like an off-white paper that I had in my stash, so I just pulled a bit out, and I stamped "You're So Humorous" underneath the bone, and then I'm wrapping a little bit more of that washi around the top, and then in my favourite method possible, I hold the paper over the cardstock that I would like to mat it onto, and then I use my T-square ruler to measure out the lines and then just cut along them. There's no waste this way. The trimmer, you're guaranteed your straight lines as long as you hold it straight, of course. But this way my cardstock tends to go a little bit further. So I double-sided taped the back of the panel, and then I foam mounted those both up, and that's the end of card 3. Okay, so here's card 4. Now these little tombstones that came into the kit are actually buttons, but I used my pliers to twist, and it was quite difficult, but they did come off, and then I used my nail file to smooth the edges over. And here I've picked the coffin pattern paper, and I'm just cutting along one of the sort of edges, if you like, and I've trimmed down a section of it. Now I've put some double-sided sellotape onto my yellow card base here, and I'm sort of just holding it up just to see how big the pieces that I need are, making a rough estimation on height and width because I want this pattern paper to sit behind, but there's no need to be wasteful. So I've cut the panel. It is ever so slightly larger, and it's always intentional to make sure that I can then trim it afterwards rather than worrying about it not being big enough if I stick it in slightly the wrong position and then have to worry about peeling it back. So I've done that, and then I centre 3 of the coffins in the middle, trim the edges off, and here I'm using some foam tape. Now I do cut the foam tape to sit either side of where the little button loop holes were, because whilst I filed it they were still a slight raise and I didn't want them to wobble off of the card front. So here this is the idea behind the card, and here I'm using actually one of the stickers from one of the add-ons just to give a little sentiment because it fits so well. And that's the end of card 4. So here's card 5. Now I'm using the door die here, and this is the gold and the black pearlescent specialty cardstock, and I've merely die cut the door out, and I'm poking all the little pieces out from both the black and the yellow door, and I'm using some double-sided sellotape, and I'm using a wide piece and then a narrower piece just to fill the back of the door in. I really like inlay die cutting. I love the look that it gets. I find it quite calming to do as well. I think it's little bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and I do really enjoy it. So I paper piece them both together using each other's innards, if you like. And here I've got some of the cobweb. Now, all I'm doing is I'm sort of teasing the cobweb out and then twisting it around the doors. There's no rhyme or reason to it particularly. I'm just sort of stretching it around in a way that I think looks like it's got a spider web on it, I suppose. And here I am just using the offcut of some of the black cardstock, specialty cardstock. So this is the same as which I cut the door from. I've run some double-sided sellotape across the back of that panel. And after fighting with the taped release paper, I then stick that down. So now here, all I have done is I've removed the double-sided sellotape backer from the back to keep the web in place. And now on top of the web, I'm putting some foam squares. So I'll show you with the other door what I mean here. But you see, of course, I wrapped the spider web around, and then once I was happy with sort of where I had it, I sort of teased the release sheet out from behind the spider web and then just sort of pressed it all back in so that the webbing won't move around too much. And then popped some more foam squares on the back of the yellow door as well. And then I'm using a couple of the stickers. As I started with the stickers, I thought I'd continue. Just to sort of give a bit of a contrast. This is quite a different card for me, but it's good to challenge oneself, I understand. And this kit is not my comfort zone at all. I am a flowers and swirlies and pretty person card maker. I like clean and simple, but I like girly things. So this was quite challenging to make from. Okay, here now I just wanted to do a single layer card, a really simple card using the stamp set, because this was the idea behind putting the stamp set as it is. I wanted to be able to make straightforward cards quickly and easily, and have them be a little bit funny. So here I've taken the spine stamp and I've put it pretty much in the centre of my Misty, and then I've stamped the first spine into the centre of my cardstock, which is actually my card front, that is the front. And here you just see me use some washi on the inside there of the Misty, and that's just because this is VersaFine and it is mucky. I really like the look VersaFine gives, but it stays wet for a long time. So if you're doing something like this, you really do run the risk of smudging, which I did actually do quite a lot of, I'm ashamed to admit. But I've got one of these wonderful Tombow sand erasers, and I managed to erase it all. So now I've actually sped this up to be sort of 6 times actual speed, so that you're not just sitting here watching me stamp for an age. But I am just moving the card base around so to be able to stamp in a kind of a cohesive pattern the spine there, and just putting tape down as is needed. I could obviously take out that backing paper each time, but I think it would be quite wasteful. So, and here I've just taken the spine off of the Misty. I gave it a clean before I did, so not to get it on my fingers, just so that I could stamp up this last little edge. And yeah, so that is pretty much the card base done. So this kind of card is great for in the post because there's nothing to knock or to come off. It can just go into a nice envelope and you're done. So here I am going around with my little sand eraser, and it would have been fine without it. It's just that I knew that those imperfections were there, and obviously I'd rather not it. And so here the sentiment that goes along with these spines is got your back. I think I love a pun. I think it's brilliant, and it's so simple. So here I'm using this little Misty grid to centre the sentiment to make sure it's right, because there's nothing worse than when you've gone to the effort to make your card and then you stamp your sentiment crooked. So there we go. That is my finished card. So it's incredibly simple, but it is effective. Okay, card 7. Roaring through them now. So I'm using the stamp set again, and I'm using the Walnut Stain Distress Oxide. So I only use this one ink pad to try to keep my supplies to a minimum. And I have the pelvis, or the hip, as I'm hoping people read it in this instance. So I'm stamping hip, hip, and underneath, hooray! And I'm using my Versamark ink pad here to dip the sides of this little card piece that I've trimmed down. And then using the embossing powder that comes in the kit, just to sort of mark up the edges. And then I've cut a piece of patterned paper, slightly larger. And here I'm using some of the vanilla cardstock, again cutting a slightly larger piece than the patterned paper. Using the T-square ruler and scissors to take that panel out. And now, having removed any of the pencil lines, I am just using my Versamark ink pad and I smush it over the whole of the front of that panel, and then cover the whole panel in the orange embossing powder. Now, you don't need to do this, you could have just done the edges, but I really like doing this because I like the feel of it. It's silly, I know. But and then, having heat set that, I'm just preparing my card base, and I trim off that little extra piece of patterned paper and run some double-sided sellotape along the remainder, the largest piece. And I peel back 2 corners of the release paper, so to give me the opportunity to line it up straight before I fully commit to sticking it down. Pull out the release papers, give it a nice press and trim off the extra. And now, so here I'm using double-sided sellotape on the back of the stamped panel, so that I am laying that flush against the patterned paper. And then I'm using double-sided tape on the back of the embossed panel. I could have embossed the orange cardstock, the card base as well, as they are not a perfect match. But I think it actually works quite well that they're not perfect. It's nice, it gives a bit of contrast from the sparkle. And here I'm just using one of the medium peel-offs, the middle-sized peel-off, just to add a little pop of purple onto this card as well. And that is the end of that card. So here we are to card 8 now. And I'm using one of the black card bases. And then I've cut a panel of the olive pearlescent cardstock to be ever so slightly smaller. I've taken another sticker from the sticker sheet, which was one of the add-ons to the kit, and I've mounted it onto the remainder of that olive cardstock. Now here's some of the mesh, and I've used a spray glue, and I actually oversprayed it. I put too much on there, which was silly with hindsight. But so all I've done is I've stuck it straight onto the card panel, trimmed around the edges, and then here you'll see I've used some of the Rick Rack and I've used some double-sided sellotape just to lay up the middle. Now ideally I should have used a thinner tape or a glue. I prefer using tape when it comes to ribbon because it's just done then and I'm not going to knock it. But you could see some of the sellotape, unfortunately. So I did neutralise it with my powder tool here, so it wasn't sticky. And then here I've just used some of the multi-medium in the matte finish because you can sort of blob it up quite high if you like. And I use that to put the little hooks on the back of the spiders on. Use some double-sided sellotape to attach that front panel onto the front of the card. And now we're on card 9. This may just be my favourite card. So here I've got the spiderweb patterned paper. I hold it up, I use my T-square ruler to line up where it is I need to do my cutting. And then just use the scissors along those lines. Now you see with 6x6 you don't save a great deal of paper, but because that little end piece will invariably get put into the bin, but I like to try. Now this is another example of me being all frugal with my offcuts. There was that little piece that was hanging over from doing the front door card. So I am now going to use that piece, and I'm going to use all 6 of the eyes, and I just sort of arrange them roughly onto the front, and then have a fight with my multimedia in the matte, and then go to the glossy accents. And I just attach those all onto this little panel. And then I get out the bandage. Now there's 2 different widths in the kit, and I'm using the narrow one to start with, and then once that's all, I use some washi tape once I've wound that all round just to fix it down. You don't have to use the washi tape of course, but I am very much a creature of using what's close to hand. As you may have noticed, I've used 3 different trimmers in this video because Sue kept stealing my trimmer, so I was having to pick up another one. Okay, so here I'm just cutting the wider bandage down just to make it similar to the first size, and I've just continued to wrap it all around using washi tape on the back, and then I've used some foam squares to mount that up, some double-sided sellotape. Now on that patterned paper on the back panel, oh, and there was Sue's pointing in saying she liked it, and here I've just taken another sticker which says weird and I'm using the glitter drops in the centre of each of the spider webs on the patterned paper in the background. So that is card number 9. Here's card 10, and this was kind of an experiment if I'm honest, and I think it came half good. So I wanted to stamp the hand behind the vellum and then the sentiment on top of the vellum. So I was using the VersaFine. I stamped the hand and then I stamped High Five. I heat embossed them both in clear embossing powder, and then I ran the vellum through my Xyron machine, and I had adhered that straight over the top of the hand. Here you can see I'm using some of the leftover patterned paper onto my card front, and I'm trimming it down a bit because it did look it did swamp the card base a bit, and then I've used a little punch which rounds the corners. I've done some very narrow trimming with some of the specialty pearlescent card, so to be able to put a little bit more of that sort of burnt orange colour into the background, and I just lay that along the edge as I have done in a previous card in this video. And then unfortunately my camera stopped working, but I assemble them all up. You're going to see a picture shortly. So here are all the leftovers from the kit. So there's plenty of these large tiles, and I did actually think of invitations when I saw those. And I've still got 5 pieces of vellum. I've still got some of the vanilla cardstock because I used one of the specialties to card base. I've got lots of peel-offs. I have almost a whole sheet of that burnt orange specialty, and still some scraps of the others. There's still enough to make at least one whole card front there. I didn't use my chameleon pen in the end, which is unfortunate, but I'm sure I'll find a use for it elsewhere. Over the 12 papers, there are 6 that are still complete, as it were, that I didn't use. And then there are still some little bits and pieces left over from some of the others, as they weren't all used up in their entirety. I've obviously got my stamp set now, so there are some nice stash builders from this month's kit. I have spider webbing. I still have the washi tape. There's still enough to make at least one good shaker card there, or decorate. We have the Midnight Sky glitter drops, a whole pot pretty much of the pumpkin pie embossing powder, the door die, which will be fantastic for next month's kit. I didn't use any of the orange or black satin ribbon. I didn't use any of the baker's twine either. I didn't use any of the purple glitter ribbon, so there is still lots left from this kit. And if you're willing to add more cardstock, I'm sure you get at least another 10 cards out, if not more. So I will move that over, and these are the additional products that I used. So I do try to keep them to a minimum, and mainly what I use is obviously things like tools like scissors, pencils, sticky pencils, tweezers, the Copic marker. I used the sand rubber, the bone folder, the pliers with the back of the buttons, acrylic blocks. I did use the Distress Oxide, glossy accents, my stamp chamois, ink blending tool, multi-medium in the matte finish. I used the corner rounding punch, my faithful T-square ruler, spray and stick. Oh no, sorry, stick and stay. Foam squares and foam tape, clear embossing powder, double-sided sellotape in different widths, a pencil eraser, VersaFine. We've also got Versamark, my anti-static powder tool. I did use the stickers, but I only used a handful. I tried not to use them as the bulk of the card, but more as sort of like sentiments. I did also use my Misty and my heat tool and my Sizzix Big Shot, and then various trimmers as well. So they are all of the additional... Oh, and my nail file. My nail file for the back of the buttons. But they are all the additional products that I used in the kit. And as I say, I do try to keep it to a minimum. There are some things which are necessary when you're wanting to make cards. And I hope that you've all enjoyed this and that you've got inspired to make something with your own kits or with your Halloween supplies. I am going to shortly be releasing a video with the winners of the blog hop. I'm ever so sorry that I haven't got to it until now. My little boy's not been very well and everything's been a little bit on top of me, so I am really sorry, but it's a very long and arduous task checking through 12 videos with hundreds of comments to try and make sure that everybody commented I will not do this again as the way to win the prize. But anyway, I will announce those winners very shortly. Here are some still shots. I'm just laying them all out for you now so that you can see them completed, but there are a few still shots here. Thank you ever so much once again for sticking with me until the end. There is going to be the mid-October release coming in the next few days, which there will be a very exciting special offer included, and the design teams have sadly had their kits delayed somewhat this month. A few have them now though, so hopefully you're going to be able to see over the coming days some of the 10 cards 1 kit videos that they will be making with this kit to give you some inspiration and ideas. Please comment below, let me know which of the cards is your favourite. I think my favourite two are the weird and the creepy, the spiders and the googly eyes. I am going to be posting these in a blog post as well, so you can have a look at the pictures more close up if you want to. Thank you again ever so much for all of your support. This kit did sell out in record time, which was amazing. I think it was only in stock for 23 hours in total, despite the fact that this is the most kits that I've ever put together. So thank you ever so much for all your support, and until next time, do take very good care of yourselves, and thank you, and happy paper crafting. Bye!